Joining us now is Joel Anand, who's co-host of America's Roundtable. Joel, good morning, sir. How are you?
Very good indeed, Paul. It's good to see you again and be part of your program here. Thank you so much for your kind invitation.
Great program over the weekend. Lots of things going on, and it's almost a moment-by-moment deal here. I know you guys have got good info on the ground level, and just tell us where we are this morning after all of the PR that was done by this administration over the weekend on all the talk shows. But what does it look like from your scope here?
Right. Paul, we've been in close contact with our trusted allies in Jerusalem, within Israel, leaders from the media, business community, as well as elected officials in Israel, in direct contact with them. And the situation on the ground is certainly very challenging indeed for our trusted ally, Israel, as we all have been informed by the Israeli government that more than 300 missiles, drones were launched targeting Israel and basically targeting Israel's civilian populations. Of course, there were certain missiles aimed at the Negev Air Force Base down in the southern part of Israel near Beersheba. However, this was truly an unprecedented attack on the sovereign state of Israel, the first ever that Iran actually launched its operations. And it's truly a very difficult hour for Israel and also for our allies in the Middle East. Nearly half or more of the airspace in the Middle East was shut down due to Iran's reckless efforts over the weekend.
It's when we watch this, we see John Kirby and others talking about the great success of Israel, because nobody was apparently the rockets, most of them, I think they had 2 or 3 that hit in some a non-populated area. But it's almost distasteful to hear the president say that this is a tremendous success from Israel, and this is the reason that they should just sit there and wait and not counter and attack. Just one quick soundbite from John Kirby.
So did he warn Israel not to respond? Did he say take the win, as has been reported?
I think the president was, again, very clear with Prime Minister Netanyahu about the success that they enjoyed last night and the impact that success ought to have.
I'm just guessing, and you know a lot more about this than the average person, but the relationship between Netanyahu and this president is not good.
Indeed, it's very similar to what the relationship that Prime Minister Netanyahu had with President Obama. If we recall, it was very tense. And
true.
What we see here is the Biden administration following the Obama administration in undermining Israel's sovereignty at every level. And as you've just rightfully mentioned, John Kirby's statement truly was shameful. If that's coming from the President of the United States, that's an embarrassment for us as an American and Americans to hear that coming from the White House. No one will stand up taking 300 hits and say that that's a win. No country would stand for that. And basically, that is not a win. A win is when you tell your enemies, this is not going to be tolerated. We're going to definitely respond. And this is, in fact, unprecedented when Iran attacks Israel. Let's remember what Reagan did. And you had the clip of President Reagan talking about taxes, and which I heard. And President Reagan, a principal leader, when a U.S. naval vessel was hit in 1988, what did he do? He did not say, let's be focused on restraint. He took out nearly half of the Iranian naval fleet. That's the response that President Reagan had. President Trump also took out the top leadership of the Iranian National Guard that was responsible for attacking U.S. bases. So that is strength. Peace through strength means you use your force very deliberately and very strategically. Biden is about appeasement. He's about appeasement to Michigan, Minnesota, rather than protecting our trusted ally, Israel, and also Americans.
How do you explain this resistance to want to bomb Iran? But I mean, we'll over and over again, threaten them, but that's about it. Why is this? Why is there the resistance to do that?
Well, we see what is transpiring today and just have to look back at history of what Obama and their administration did and what Biden administration did just after the first few days when they took office. They basically wanted to bring Iran back into the fold. They allowed Iran to make billions of dollars, some nearly $100 billion that are being used not just only against Israel, but against our U.S. servicemen and women in the Middle East. Yep. 3 of them died, if we don't remember, were killed by Iran-led proxies in the Middle East. And what our response was? Just pinprick strikes against Iran. It wasn't serious then. And unfortunately, Biden's administration is more about appeasement, is more about restraint than firm leadership. When he says don't, look at what Putin did in Ukraine. Putin went ahead. When he said don't to the Iranian leadership, what did they do? They went ahead. Biden has no serious leadership as far as credibility is concerned. There is zero credibility, and we truly need not only a change in the Iranian leadership, but hopefully one day soon, a change in the White House.
Joel, how much because rockets are expensive, and they had a pretty good buffet of them that went out and over into Israel. Is any of this money getting to them? Are they being fueled by some of the revenue that has not been frozen by this administration? Because my understanding is that money is floating around and nobody knows exactly where it is.
Absolutely, Paul. In fact, just the fact that the Biden administration no longer enforces these sanctions on Iran, Iran was able to sell cheap oil to China, another adversary of the United States of America. And that allowed Iran to amass significant wealth, nearly $100 billion. So, of course, they are the ones now supplying drones to Russia that are attacking Ukrainians. And then we have to send money to defend Ukraine. So the average American is much smarter and more talented in understanding this whole fiasco that we're experiencing in Europe and now in the Middle East. They may be punished by Biden's economic policies, but the American people are smart. They see what's happening today, and the fact is that the Biden administration caused this mayhem, first with the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Let's keep that in mind as well. That gave a signal to adversaries that we are weak. So America does not do well when it leads from behind, like Obama said, or with appeasement and diplomacy to the point where our allies do not even take us seriously, let alone our adversaries.
We were told to believe a lot of nonsense during the 2020 election. Most of the crap is now assuming squatters' rights at our kitchen table. I do believe that some of that, we'll get to it more. I got a quick break here, but we'll get to some of that. And also another soundbite I want you to hear from John Kirby that actually kind of embraces the failure of this administration back in the days when Gates told us that if you choose this guy, he has the longest list of foreign affairs failures that you could possibly get. And in a way, I don't think John Kirby meant to say this, but he kind of highlighted those failures. And, geez, Joel, this is the same guy, Joe Biden, that was up there warning us that if we elect Donald Trump, he's going to get us into war in 4 years of peacetime instead of war. And now look exactly where we are. We'll continue the conversation with Joel Samee. Good time. Let me get back to Joel Samee, America's Roundtable. And we were talking about this. Robert Gates was the guy. He was the most respected defense secretary who served under Bush. And he also served under Obama, who famously said that Joe Biden, quote, has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. And people looked at this and said, 81 million people decided to vote on this guy? And I mention this because Joel, over the weekend, U.S. Colonel and retired combat veteran Douglas McGregor says, and I quote, in the history of U.S. foreign and defense strategy, no presidential administration has ever cultivated a rise of the new powerful groupings of nation states that oppose the United States as the Biden administration has. So that is where we are with this guy in less than 4 years.
Absolutely. Well, when we look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., individuals have to realize that President Obama never left Washington, D.C. He still has a residence in D.C., and his administration that he had, a great number of the officials are in the Biden administration. So it's basically a continuation of what Obama began during his time period in the White House. So what we're seeing today with the Biden administration, what they have accomplished is not really creating a much safer world. We are living in a very unsafe world. There is greater risk than any time before. We have an adversarial China that is continuing its cyber attacks and also saber rattling with what we're seeing in Taiwan. We are seeing what's happening in Europe at the moment. Billions of dollars of taxpayer money have been sent to defend Ukraine. And on tax day today, we're reminded about the importance of fiscal responsibility. But when you have a commander-in-chief that is not really protecting Americans, but also putting our trusted allies at risk, we are in a very difficult position at this moment. And the Biden administration's failures are certainly impacting us.
So you're saying basically that if you're looking for the people who are pulling the strings behind this president as a puppet, you point out that Barack Obama is probably the main guy doing this?
Well, you see a very similar foreign policy initiatives from the Obama administration to the Biden administration. You see the same personnel in the White House that undermined the Netanyahu government and also the Israeli government during the Obama administration. And we're seeing the same thing even worse now. There is an anti-Israel component or elements within the State Department as well as within the White House. So rather than they're calling for a ceasefire, meaning telling our Israeli allies to basically put down their arms and just basically have a ceasefire. Well, we had a ceasefire on October 6th, and what happened? Iran proxy Hamas attacked Israel. So they said to Israel, well, we want you to, focus on restraint. We know that Iran is behind a lot of these attacks. Restraint. But the truth of the matter is that in that particular part of the world, restraint is not the answer. Restraint is never going to let your enemies basically understand the impact of force. So our ally Israel, actually the leadership of Israel needs to do what it has a responsibility to safeguard its citizens. And if it has to strike Iran, then Israel's government needs to take that option.
And all the while, because we worry about this on two different fronts, if for some reason they can come together and Israel decides to attack Iran, most of that's going to be paid for. A lot of it's going to be paid for by the American taxpayers as we're continuing to fund the Ukraine. And there's got to be a breaking point somewhere here because we heard that the strategic oil reserves are down. They're not being replenished. We also heard that our military readiness is at the lowest it's been in a long time. And John Kirby's out there just promoting the fact that this is a wonderful success for the Israelis, that they weren't hit.
White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby. I want to play something the president said just a couple of days ago about where we are in our support of Israel in light of the Iran attack.
As I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, our commitment to Israel's security against these threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Let me say it again, ironclad.
Axios reporting that President Biden told Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu during a call on Saturday that the U.S. will not support any Israeli counterattack against Iran. That's according to a senior White House official. So where are we with Israel with respect to responding to this attack?
Now listen to this, because in this he actually points the failure of Joe Biden by saying that, Here it goes.
Well, I think first we need to see what the War Cabinet decides in terms of the whatever next step they want to pursue.
But what are we saying to them now?
It's going to be up to the Israelis to decide what the next step is here. I will just say this. President Biden, since the beginning of this conflict, has worked very hard to keep this from becoming a broader regional war,
He's failed.
to keep the tensions from escalating.
He's failed.
Everything he's done, everything he's moved in the region, every decision, every discussion that he's had is all designed to not let this become a broader regional war, and that's where his head still is.
So he's failed on all of these things, like everything else, the economy, the border, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. It's been a total failure at every front possible. And when we meet with allies in the Middle East as well as in Europe, they basically look at the American leadership as a failure. And we basically, have followed this very closely, is that if we had strong leadership, Russia would not have invaded Ukraine. The Iran-backed proxies would not have attacked Israel. And so what are we doing at this moment? We're spending so much money from a defense point of view. Economically, Americans are strapped like never before. And keep in mind, what happened over the weekend, the Israelis basically communicated that they spent somewhere over $500 million to basically block these drones, missiles from entering into Israel's airspace. And even our allies, Jordan, they had to take down a number of drones. Saudi Arabia was involved in providing intelligence and assistance. UAE was helping us out as well. So this is a disruption like we've never seen before. And as we mentioned earlier, Reagan's firm leadership was when Iran impacted one U.S. Navy vessel. Reagan in 1988 took out more than half of the Iranian naval fleet. That's a message to Iran. And unfortunately, we do not have that message coming out of the White House. Israel needs to do what it is responsible for, safeguarding its citizens, including Americans that are in Israel and that part of the world.
I'm a little surprised that North Korea is not rattling sabers and everything else now. And China, as far as Taiwan is concerned, who knows what's going on with that one. But the fact remains that Iran is more dangerous now than it was 4 years ago, number one. And number two,
absolutely,
that this president has done everything he possibly can to enable that, one way or the other,
absolutely,
through most of his policies.
Yeah. In fact, when Iran sends a message to Israel by saying, you are that little Satan, that great Satan, that big Satan is America. So they're chanting death to America on Tehran streets, and they want to acquire nuclear weapons that may be one day targeting America. So Israel is on the front lines protecting us, and Biden is allowing individuals in Michigan to say death to America without even sending a message to them to say this has to stop.
I got to tell you, that's scary, though. When you see some of the gatherings and the force that they're putting together in numbers in their protest, and these are not pink-haired ladies and things like that. These people have a religion based behind them, and it is a little scary. I'm thankful that most of that is up north, but what is up north sooner or later comes down south. And the protests are growing louder and louder against Israel and equally against the United States of America. Are we safer today than we were yesterday? Are we closer and closer to having American men and women on the ground in another war zone?
Well, I hope not. I hope that our allies will be able to fend this attack from Iran, as well as what we see in Russia. But we do need strong leadership in the White House, and elections matter. And Paul, we've seen what has happened when you have weak leadership in the White House. We had 4 years of peace and security under the Trump administration. Under the Reagan administration, there was peace and security. So we have good models to look at as far as what happens when the electorate votes for weak leadership or strong leadership that not only cares about the American citizen, making sure that we have an economy that is prosperous, but also national security.
So, real quick, I'm only about 10 seconds to answer. What do you think happens next?
Well, I would say that Israel has the right to respond, and if they don't respond, they will become more vulnerable. And I just hope and pray that the Israels will muster the strength to respond effectively, and that the White House and actually the leadership in the Republican side should be much louder in their support for trusted ally Israel.
Always informative. Joel, thank you, man. Appreciate it very, very much. We got more coming.